we're going to create a new landmark to honor one of the most famous Biloxi High School graduates and the most famous person in our history. April will mark the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13, a mission that has been called NASA's most successful failure, and a mission that united the world in hope, prayer, and problem solving as the troubled spacecraft made its way back to Earth. Our own Fred Haise, a Biloxi native who grew up on Back Bay, brought tremendous pride to this city, to the nation, and to the entire world as Apollo 13 lunar module pilot. Since Adam and Eve, Fred is one of only 24 people to have flown to the moon and back. He has been a tremendous asset to Biloxi and the coast, inspiring students in Biloxi public schools and being the driving force in creating the Infinity Space Center near the Stennis Space Center. We have a statue dedicated to the old world explorer Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville down at the Biloxi Visitor Center. And I want to see a statue, a new community landmark that pays homage to our new world explorer, Fred Haise.
Mary Ott Tremmel Davidson, and I have the privilege of doing an image of astronaut Fred Haise. This is a fantastic project that I'm really enjoying. He has such a wonderful smile that's what I'm really working on right now to put together.
Now, what are people looking at right here?
They're looking at his bust, which I hope to have ready by April for the event.
How would you describe this? What was...
This is a clay image that I'm trying to achieve and gather the likeness of Fred. His youthfulness, his enthusiasm, his wonderful smile.
And you of course know Fred.
I have met him, yes. I know his sister Brenda, of course. She was...
Does it make it easier that the person is alive?
Yes, but I would love to have him sitting here. That's the tough part. Trying to get photos and gathering the side view, the front view, at that age in his outfit is the big difficulty, really, because even when I did Bishop Howell's, he sat for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to have our live model, but it's a lot more difficult to do it from pictures, obviously.
It would be really great to have a live cooperative model.
There you go.
and he's a busy man. He really, I know he does a lot of philanthropic work. I know that he's very close to infinity, but how long have you been doing this? And why do you do it?
Well, the first commission was with the Biloxi Chamber of Commerce for d'Iberville back in 1997. My husband worked very closely with me on that project. We finished it in 1998 in time for the 1699 anniversary of the founding of Biloxi.
And now you're doing another Explorer.
Yes, for outer space, yes.
Have you talked to Fred about this?
No. I thought that they were pretty much keeping it a secret.
What has been the most challenging part? And if you would show us on this, what's been the most challenging part for you to do?
Always the eyes are the most difficult.
Why?
Just because instead of doing an eyeball, I do the reverse. I use a recess to try to capture the depth of his eyes. And it's to transform the real thing to that to the real thing is the big challenge.
What would you say about Fred's smile looking at this bust?
Oh, I love his smile. It's the greatest.
Why?
Well, it's kind of cocked up to the left a little bit, kind of like he's really enjoying it.
And besides Fred Haise, the sculpture that you're working on now, which you hope to complete this year, you've also done some other work which is now famously on repose up in Wisconsin at what's called the Maritime Museum there, known as Death's Door. Tell me about that project before we lead into that story at the end of this interview.
Well, for over 20 years, my husband and I used to travel north in the summertime to teach bronze casting. So our name and the fact that we worked in bronze was well known in Door County. And when it came time to have a statue done in bronze, we were called to send a proposal. And we were selected to do a fisherman pulling in a net of fish for the Death's Door Maritime Museum, which is located at the very, very end of the peninsula of Door County.
And now that that project is done and is on display, we come back to Fred, and you're going to be presenting him in April. So give me just a little feeling about your involvement with this. How important is it to you?
Oh, it's exceedingly important. I mean, to be recognized in your own hometown, to do a statue of this magnitude, I'm just absolutely thrilled. My husband and I both are native Biloxians, so it's just a real privilege to be able to accomplish this.
And you did a lot of research on this.
Yes, plenty of research was done. We also visited the Infinity in Hancock County. I talked with the curator there. I've gotten tons of photographs online and studied everything I could about the figure and the appropriate, because there's been an evolution of the astronaut outfits through the years, of course. So I wanted to be as accurate as possible. Hello, I'm Marriott Davidson, and I have had the privilege of producing a statue for Gills Rock Death's Door Maritime Museum. How did it all start? Well, once I got the commission, then I had to create an armature. An armature will be like the bone structure of a figure, and I had to hire a model to pose for me, and I used just regular 2x2 wood to do that. After I got the structure, then I needed to build up and create the figure. And in order to do that, I needed something very light that could be added. Otherwise, by the time I put the clay on it, it would be extremely heavy. So what I have is styrofoam and some sealant. And I was able to join up and create various muscles, etc., on the figure. From there, I could take the figure and start drawing lines that would demarcate creases and folds, etc., that would be in the clothing that he would be wearing. Once I got the armature and the styrofoam and all the position that I wanted, then became the long process, and this took probably most of my time, was to create the clay over the structure. Plastiline is a non-drying clay. It comes in large chunks, and you have to scrape it and move it and gradually cover all the figure and start to produce the wrinkles, the folds. Because he was wearing foul weather gear, there's a lot of folds because the garment itself is rather stiff, unlike a soft pair of jeans or something of that nature. So the whole figure then is covered. If you notice, then I have no head and no hands, no finishing of the feet, but the body is basically covered. And then all the detail of the straps, the buttons, the buckles steps in. The next step after the figure has created, then I needed to work on the head, the portrait. And that took a while to create the features that would resemble a fisherman from Gills Rock. Not in great detail. The family wanted more just a general view of him. Then, as many things go, I had to do several prototypes because the hat with clay, a clay hat is very heavy. So if you see, I have a whole structure underneath here, which is made out of a very thin epoxy, extremely light, and it will hold and support the hat. And then I could create the feeling for the stitching, etc., around the hat. After the head and the cap are finished, then I realized that I had to make a special armature to go onto the neck because the head and hat were so heavy and he's leaning forward that this was a support underneath. In trying to work with the hands, I realized that he would be grasping very tightly the net with the fish in it. So the construction of the hands actually began with a piece of copper that I soldered wire to. And then I was able to bend and create the pose. Otherwise, just with the clay would have easily, well, just cracked on me. So I had to create the various fingers in a position that was suitable for grabbing the net. The box was created to resemble the ones that are used on the boats to bring in the fish. And this wooden box, what I did was I placed a plastic coil in it so I could get bulk, and also I could protect the bottom of the box because in the future, just as on the boat, we need an opening in the bottom of the box to allow water or snow to melt and leave the box. The net is very strong, but also very stiff, and I had to make it resemble like he was greatly pulling in a large amount of fish. So I had to put it under tension, and I stretched it out from nail to nail so that I could create this tension. Once I get the net under tension, then I had to hold that, and by holding that position, I used polyester resin, which is a wonderful material for coating it and to stiffen it so that it could resemble the net being pulled in loaded with the fish. Once the clay figure is complete from the top of his head down to his shoes, at least to the top of his shoes, I'll show you later how I put together the bottom. But the next thing was to do the fish. And I began with a pattern, all kinds of, because it's a medley of fish in different positions. And I started with styrofoam, worked with the clay, and then finally completed all the detail down to the scales, etc., that make up the fish. The final step for the clay stage of the figure is to do the soles. Because he was standing on a platform, I have to lay him down and then add the shoes to him, choosing a pattern that would be appropriate for being on a boat. Just a brief explanation of how one goes from the clay model to wax, which is the second big step in casting of bronze. Inside of this was the clay figure, and then it's covered with a rubber mold. And then the rubber mold is covered with plaster. And the reason being that the rubber is flexible and you want to keep it as firm and as positive as possible. Then what you have here is an opening at the bottom, and then wax is melted and poured into it till you get a wax form. All parts of the figure are done this way, and they're done in segments. For instance, arms are separated, the legs are separated, so that we get real precise reproduction in wax. After all the clay is completed, then the next step is to make a mold of all the parts. The parts have to be cut up, leg by leg, arm by arm, until all the parts are in small enough portions that can be held and worked with conveniently. The next step then, after the clay is taken out of the mold and wax is poured in. Here's an example of the wax that has been transformed into the net, and it's cast very, very well into wax. But when it came time for the fish, I discovered that the stiffness of the net and the fact that I didn't want polyester resin onto the fish, it would have disguised and removed the scales. I had to go back after we had cast the fish in wax, that I had to go back and actually hand make all of the wax net over all the fish. Here is an example of one of the legs that is now in wax form. Notice that it now has a bottom to it as well. You remember the clay form that was first initiated to do the bottom. But that eventually has to be cut off, and you will see now the leg as well as part of the torso is now being dipped. These are all in wax, and they're being dipped in a liquid called colloidal silica, and then they are sprinkled with a sand called silica sand, which of course sand is silica. Here you see the bottom of the shoe, and you see the leg. Notice the tabs on each of one of them, but they're all hollow. Nothing is solid. Those tabs will help to pour metal eventually into the form. Here's the leg at a later stage. As you can see, the bottom of the foot, quite a few layers, and as many 15, sometimes 20 layers of this are repeated until you get a thick enough mold, strong enough to withstand the 2000 degrees. Here we see a wonderful pouring of the bronze. It is heated up to 2000 degrees and is transformed into this beautiful golden liquid. It's in what we call a crucible, which withstands the heat. Here you see the forms being cast one by one. After all the pouring, then the pieces are cleaned. All the mold has to be removed, and then the final stage of welding all the pieces back together again. Here we see the figure of him, the net, the box, the fish, all of it are back together again, but now no longer in clay, they're transformed into bronze. The final stages for casting would be to put what we call a patina or a finish onto the bronze. And here we have him outside, and we have just completed the patina on the figure. The hat and all of his clothing are transformed into a beautiful brown patina. We see now the figure along with the net and the fish. The net and the fish have a contrasting patina on them to bring out the beautiful, it's called cupric nitrate, which is sort of a greenish color to contrast with the figure. On July 4th, we had the unveiling of the figure in the front of the museum. And then finally, we have statue complete from head to toe with a temporary sign, which will be later replaced with a full explanation of the casting. That night, being July the 4th, the photographer from the Door County Advocate took a picture of him along with the fireworks. A beautiful ending to a beautiful day. I want to thank the board from Gills Rock Maritime Museum, as well as the people of Gills Rock, for letting me be a part of this wonderful project that I've been doing for the last almost 2 years now. But it's been a wonderful experience working with everyone there and completing a project that I am very proud of. Thank you so much.
Mississippi Power and the city of Biloxi are honoring Apollo 13 astronaut and Biloxi native Fred Haise on the 50th anniversary of his interplanetary exploration. Join us Friday, April 10th, for a banquet honoring Fred Haise at the Biloxi Civic Center at 6 p.m. Tickets are $25 per person. They are available online and at the Biloxi Visitor Center. And then join us Saturday, April 11th, 2020, for the unveiling of the launch pad south of the Biloxi Lighthouse. It begins at 1:13 p.m., 50 years to the exact time that the Apollo 13 lifted off.